All right, so we'll get started. So welcome everybody to Women's Health Week, as it is this week, and our webinar this morning, which is getting back on a Brompton bicycle. As you know, my name's Dayna Andreussi, and I'm the friendly face that you see when you visit Melbourne Brompton Junction or call us on the phone. Of course, we're closed at the moment due to COVID restrictions, but I'm still here online answering all your questions and helping people with their inquiries. So just a couple of housekeeping matters before we get started into the session. The session is being recorded. So if you'd like to keep your camera turned off, that's perfectly fine. Questions and answers will be at the end of the session, but you're welcome to post any queries that you have as we go along into the chat box. If you've got any technical questions about how to use the functions on Zoom, if you can put them in the chat box too. People may be using different devices, so how to turn things on and off or how to use functions may differ depending on the device that you're using. If you have any urgent questions, there's a raise hands function that you can use, which I believe for most people could be, I've lost my mouse, down in the participants, near participants, which we may use once or twice during the session. Most people should be muted. If you bear that in mind that you are, if you need to ask a question, unmute yourself and then please remute once you have finished that part of the conversation. So just so that we can get a sense of who is in the group today, would you mind raising your hand either physically or using the raise hand button if you're thinking of getting back into riding and you've joined the session for that reason? Anyone? Yes, one. I'm not sure how to flip between the screens. Is anybody else? Thank you, Danielle. Is anyone else, has anyone else started riding this year and they're looking for tips and advice on riding in general and how to keep riding or improving their riding experience? Elsie?
Yep, I've started to join Stan in the he cycles every day, come rain, shine, whatever. The other day we had gusty winds of 59 kilometers an hour, and the I'm trying to watch my language. And the silly booby went out cycling in 59 kilometers an hour gusty winds. Well, I mean, to be fair, he's watching his blood pressure and high iron and everything, so he decided to be some cycling fanatic, come rain, shine, whatever.
So you're struggling to keep up.
And so, yes. And so, but I tell myself that I would join him only on the weekends, only on Saturday and Sundays. But when the wind becomes like 20 something, I go one round and I die and I go home.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And we'll come back to those experiences in just a few moments after we get through some of the introductions. And so from that, I presume everybody else who's joined us are more experienced and seasoned riders. Okay, I'm just going to put Danielle's hand down. So that means there's a lot of wisdom and experience here to share from the group, generally speaking. So just a little bit more about my background before we go on to our special guests, who are Tina and Brett. Some of you may know one or both. When my partner wanted to buy me a Brompton to begin with, he had to basically twist my arm to get me to take a test ride. But within a year, I was commuting daily on it, and within 2, you couldn't pry me from the saddle. I just love them so much. It'd been 5 years since I'd owned a bike, so it was getting back into riding and learning all those things, as Elsie had just said. I'm one of the 5 founding members of Melbourne Brompton Club, and it's being so involved with the club and really getting into writing that rescued me from my office job and led to my current role managing Brompton Junction Melbourne. For anyone who may not be aware, Brompton Junctions are flagship stores for Brompton Bicycle. So on to our special guests. Let me introduce you firstly to Tina of Wheel Women. I'll let her tell you more about Wheel Women in just a moment. Tina's also an ambassador for Jean Hales for Women's Health. Jean Hales is the wonderful organisation behind Women's Health Week. There's too many W's in all that, I have to say. She's also an ambassador for This Girl Can Victoria, which is a campaign by Vic Health to empower women to get out and do more stuff they love, like riding a bike. Amy Gillett Foundation, which is working towards creating a safe cycling environment for all Australians, and Specialised Bikes. So welcome, and thank you, Tina, for joining us today. Can you share with us how you went from not riding at all to being a cycling ambassador for women?
Yeah, it's a pretty weird thing to now say that I am in fact, it's one of those things when you fill out the passport or immigration things and it asks for what is your job, and sometimes people say, oh, just put cyclist or athlete, and I'm like, but I'm not an athlete, I'm just a person who rides a bike. So yeah, it kind of took a long time to get my head around that I've gone from being a graphic designer to being a person who advocates for riding bikes. So I guess I'd always had a bike in my life. I don't ever remember not having a bicycle. But I think, and as a child, you know, I had to keep up with 3 older brothers. So, you know, it was tearing around the neighborhood on a bike all the time. But like most girls, I guess, as you hit those teenage years, activity becomes less important and sport becomes less important. And as I got into my 20s, definitely the bike just, you know, was kind of non-existent. It just stayed in the shed. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I went to Scandinavia and did some backpacking. And a friend of mine lent me this really rusty old black bicycle, big sit-up cruiser kind of thing. And I rode everywhere on that bicycle. And I still remember this really pivotal moment of riding that bike down along the coastline from a place called Dyrhavn, which is the deer park, back to Copenhagen. And I had my Walkman on, with cassette player Walkman on, thinking, this is freedom. I just love this so much. And that was a real turning point for me. And when I came back to Australia, I bought a new bike, and thought, this is it. I'm just going to ride everywhere. But of course, when I did that, I realized it wasn't actually like riding in Scandinavia at all. In fact, it was really scary, and I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't do it. And pretty quickly, I reckon probably a couple of months, the bike was back in the shed, and the bike remained back in the shed for many, many years. And it wasn't until after my son was born where I decided I would put him in a baby seat, because that was like the thing to do. And I realized that was really hard as well, because every time he leaned, the bike would tip. And then he got older, and I put him on one of the tag-alongs, and the same thing. Every time he leaned, the bike would be leaning, and the whole thing just became so scary and dangerous, and I didn't like it. And it wasn't until I was actually 48, I think, when my son was old enough to say he wanted to do the Great Victorian Bike Ride, and the school needed some parent helpers, and I got involved in that. And I realized actually through that process, I really loved riding a bike, and I persevered. I had a really old 22 kilo Kmart bike, and it was an agonizing process. But when I tried a lighter bike, I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I rode that bike into the ground, and we still have that bike, and it's a bit of a relic in the family now, because we know what it did, and totally changed my life. And so that's how I went from 0 to, you know, a lot of kilometers every year.
Inspiring that you've come so far, and now you're helping so many more women. but your story would be so typical of many, the way that you started
Yeah.
and stopped, and maybe tried starting again and stopped, because it is really hard to get starting again, and there are so many barriers to overcome.
I think that's one of the things that women forget about, is that, you know, staying healthy is not a continuum in our lives. It's something where we stop, we start, we stop, we start. And as I often say to people at We're Women, when we're teaching about skills are something that will stay with you forever, but your fitness goes up and down all the time. And so you shouldn't expect or beat yourself up about the fact that you have to keep doing this constantly. We do have those periods where we stop for all kinds of reasons, and it doesn't matter if you do. The point is that you make a decision at some point along the way to actually do it again, or keep going, or change the activity you're doing and try something else, just as long as you're active. That's the most important thing.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tina. So moving on to Brett now, who I'll introduce. Brett is joining us today from Calgary in Canada. So she's still stuck in yesterday, I'm afraid. Welcome, Brett. Brett's a really passionate advocate for both cycling and sustainable living. Literally nothing stops her, whether it's snow up to the eaves or beautiful sunshine for the 2 weeks of the year that she gets it. Some of her posts, because we met on Twitter, and some of her posts really made me feel wow and completely mind blown, as she was training for the Trans Am, which is the Trans-American bike race, which is a self-supported ultra distance bike race across the width of the US. This year the race has been cancelled due to coronavirus, like so many other things. But Brett's still out there riding and inspiring her local community and people across the world, and making me feel incredibly lazy all at the same time. So welcome, Brett. Would you mind sharing with us how you came to ride a Brompton?
Sure. Thanks, Dayna, very much for having me, and thanks to this community of women for inviting me in. I really appreciate it. I've been cycling pretty much without interruption since I was at a very young age. And I got into longer distance cycling pretty early. So I can recall, pushing my friends out of the city and into the countryside in Niagara and Ontario, which is where I grew up. And when I got a little older, which is to say about high school age, I got involved in a cycling club, which was actually a racing club. I never loved racing, but I was introduced to long distance cycling. And the other legacy impact that this club had on me, it was the first time in my life that I met people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s who were riding bikes. I had no frame of reference for adults riding bikes before meeting the people in this club. And that's when I came to understand that bicycling is for a lifetime. It's not just something that kids do to boot around on. And that started to change things for me. But even still, I was riding for sport until my 30s. And I always regarded bicycling as sport. And then I started to transition and understand cycling as transport. And that, again, was a huge paradigm shift for me. And that sort of opened the door to the Brompton. So later in my 30s, I wanted to have a bicycle that was congruent with pathway culture in Calgary. So I wanted something that was comfortable to sit on, a little bit more upright so people could see my face and I could offer a pleasant greeting, as well as something that was a bit more moderately paced. I didn't necessarily ride to be fast. I like going far. And so I chose the Brompton for those reasons. But I also chose it too because, as you alluded to in my introduction, Dayna, I'm very interested in sustainable living. So my family and I live in a small condo or apartment style condo. And I wanted a bike that I could put at the door that didn't take up a huge footprint. And the Brompton was the solution. So for those reasons, I chose a Brompton. And as it turned out, it still was the suitable bike for long distance riding as well as transport. And I really appreciate that about the Brompton.
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. That's awesome. I mean, small apartment living is the reason why so many of us choose a Brompton. It's not the only reason for some people, but it's certainly one of them for people all around the world. here in Australia, so many people seem to have a lot of space, and not everyone. I mean, we certainly don't have the garage that so many people living in the suburbs do, but certainly some parts of the world, London particularly, springs to mind, being where Bromptons are made, but Japan, and increasingly places where people live in high-rise apartments, or there's less and less space in cities, that sustainable living and smaller apartment or house sizes is coming to the fore, and people are thinking more and more about their footprint. But getting back to women and getting into writing, and well, let's briefly just touch on some of the reasons why they stop, because they're also the barriers as to why they may think twice about starting again. And at this point, I'm going to invite everybody to chime in if they'd like. Does anyone want to volunteer reasons why they stopped? We've already heard from Tina. If indeed they have had a period where they weren't writing, and if any of those reasons still applied to them when they came to start again. For instance, was it infrastructure? Was there a lack of infrastructure that made you feel unsafe to get to where you needed to go? Elsie's already chimed in with lack of confidence. So is that with your skills and where you're writing? Tina, what do you normally see as the main?
I attended the workshop that was organized by Tina's group on where we had a group of ladies and we were writing, and it really helped. It really, really helped. But I think at the end of the day, I feel, and someone, anyone just correct me if I'm wrong. I think at the end of the day, it's still yourself, whether you want to garner enough courage, with that willingness to overcome that fear. Easier said than done, it's a mental thing. And little things can raise your self-confidence, and then little things can just put you back in the deep end of the pool. So things like writing in a group where I had that workshop got me going, and I got so confident. I was in between experienced writers. They were watching out for me and things like that. I even shared my experience with somebody in a chat group, for cycling chat group in Singapore, and they were saying about, this guy was saying that his wife was afraid of riding, and I shared my experience. I said, go ride with friends, make sure she's in between, make sure she can see you or something like that, and things like that. And so that workshop was really good. So that was those were the activities that sort of helped me to boost my self-confidence, knowing that I've got experienced writers around me. But what sets me off very easily is when you're writing and again, I'm watching my language, some donkey ass suddenly zooms past you and don't give you that 1 meter distance, and and suddenly your heart you literally vomit your heart out. And you have to quickly go to a quiet corner and just compose yourself, and then you start to berate yourself. What the hell you think you're doing? Why are you writing? That guy could have killed you, blah, blah, blah. And then you have another voice saying, shut up and just go on, Otherwise, you've spent all this money on a very nice Brompton and you're never going to ride it. The seat costs a lot of money,
Back to your first comment, there is no right and wrong, especially when it comes to how you're feeling. And your point about writing with people to give you confidence and to share experiences and learn from each other is also a key way to get confidence and to keep moving forward. Jimmy's also chimed in here with a really great point, that time pressures that people experience in really busy lives, and everyone's got a very busy life. It's just something that everybody can relate to. where driving always seems to be the faster option. One of the reasons why, if I can just share a personal point here, I wasn't riding much for a good period of my young adult life was because my university was 80 kilometers away from home. So there was no way I was going to drive or ride 3 days a week from home to uni. I didn't live on campus because it was cheaper to drive every day 3 days a week than it was to stay there. So in our sprawling cities, and this was up in Brisbane, it's so much of the time the infrastructure that we need to choose alternative transports as opposed to having a car just doesn't exist. So oftentimes we're pushed into owning a car and the bike kind of falls away. Either it's too hard, too steep, it's simply faster to go those distances. But, and if you'll allow me to keep on a bit, because we become so reliant on cars sometimes the perceived importance and the amount of time saving having a car is perceived to grant us is no longer true, especially the closer you live to cities and the shorter the area that you need to transverse. So being stuck in traffic, needing to find a car park, and the cost of having a car can be underestimated, and the amount of time that you would need to allow to ride between places can be underestimated. Sorry, I'm just going to mute myself, Rose. Tick, would anyone else like to chime in?
Yeah, I would. I think, you know, just going back to what's stopping women, I think that it's not a simple answer, really. There are so many things that get in the way of women getting on their bikes. But I spoke about this last night in a Women's Health Week Zoom that was on. And I think there's so much talk and so much media about the barriers to women's cycling, and we keep hearing about the barriers to women's cycling all the time. But my opinion is that the more we hear about, or the more we read about the barriers to women's cycling, and I keep saying, as someone who's come from an advertising background where, you know, I guess the main thing is repeat, repeat, repeat. So we implant the ideas in people's heads. It's a little bit like that. And the more we read about it in the media, the more women start to believe that there are a lot of barriers into getting on a bike. So if we keep repeating that story, of course they're going to start saying, this is really hard and this is really difficult. In many ways, from my personal experience, I began to realize that there's such, you know, they're perceived barriers, but they're actually not really a barrier. You know, I know it's hard and I know it can be scary and you can feel unsafe. There's a whole lot of issues like that. There's no question about it, but there are ways to actually get around it. And with what Elsie was saying about riding in a group and it made her feel more comfortable, I think and having these people whiz past her on the bike path way too fast. I think one of the things that's really missing in this whole picture of getting people on bikes is education. And it sounds weird because so many of us rode bikes as kids and it was really easy. And we didn't even think about what we had to do. We just got on the bike and rode. But I think now with so many changes in the way we live and I guess overpopulation in many ways in the cities, education would go a long way to be helping people understand what we need to do to be sharing the paths, sharing the roads. How do we deal with, how do we learn to use the infrastructure? And I keep saying in many of our lessons, and I know some of our coaches would agree with this, that you can have the best infrastructure in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, it means diddly squat. You need to know how to be able to, you know, negotiate those turns. You need to know how to be able to negotiate those riders who are going crazy and how to deal with it and feel confident about staying safe yourself. So I think there's a whole lot of factors involved in this, really.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to chime in with something?
So
Go.
I grew up cycling in South London, and I was talking with some friends the other day, and I remember cycling to Trafalgar Square at about 11 years old, and it just seemed a normal thing to do. Mm-hmm. Now I look at the roads and I just think, how did we ever do that? And for me, coming and moving to Australia, one of the things I find when I ride is I actually feel like I'm back in that sort of day, because there is less traffic to me. And randomly, Australian drivers are actually generally more cycle aware than the UK drivers. And having ridden a fair amount with Tina and the Real Women, it's something that I have said quite a lot of times. I feel actually safer here than I did in London. But it's how to help other women then understand that being aware of what's going on around you and being aware of that traffic does not make it dangerous in some ways. The traffic is there, and generally, as I say, in Australia, the drivers are much more aware, much more bike aware than elsewhere in the world. I've ridden in Canada as well, and generally they are better and more cycle aware than the UK particularly. And so it's a very different experience for every single person who rides. So us, in some ways, talking about all of this, it's the individual who has that experience of being out there. And we can encourage and give as much confidence as we can, but it is for each individual.
Gail?
That's it.
You're on mute.
Right. Yeah, good point, Jimmy. I think that's Tina raises a really good point, that it's quite complex. It's not going to be a very simple answer to get women and people on bikes, because there are so many issues involved. And I think Jimmy's point about it being individual, that's the thing I wanted to add, is that the important thing is to get on a bike and then design your usage of it, so get on a bike and have that support of coaching, have the support of group rides, education, but then realize that it's going to be your own experience, and it's going to be the design of your work commute, for example, will depend upon where you live, what city you live in, how far your work is away from home. There's going to be a lot of individual differences. So it's sort of, the education is really important as a part of allowing people to create that personal design of their bicycle lifestyle. So infrastructure is part of the picture. For me, one of the things that gets in the way of me riding to work is that it's 28 kilometres each way. And even on an e-bike, I found that hard to do 5 days a week. So I had to make an adjustment that, okay, I can probably do that 3 days a week, depending on what else is going on. And the other 2 days I had to take the car. So even though I would love to be able to ride every day, that's just not physically possible for me. I looked at multimodal, combining with the tram. The Brompton came in really handy for that. But it's not always possible. One of the things that I think about when choosing the bike over the car is I'm sort of double dipping in a way, because I'm getting my exercise as well as my transport. And I like that. That's all from me.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, and a lot of, when we have people who come in to look for, sorry about the clock, to look to purchase a bike to start commuting. Oftentimes I see people reflecting my own journey. They want to use the bike in conjunction with either a train or a tram to begin with, or have that as the backup option, whether it's a short ride or a longer ride and maybe catching the tram home or something. And that's how I spent most of my first year, and learning traffic patterns too, because around Christmas and St Kilda Road, which is an absolute nightmare as the season gets busy, and more dangerous because people just are focused, drivers, taxi drivers particularly, on what they want to be, and bicycle lanes are just non-existent, not to mention bicycles or riders. So being able to combine those other methods of transports, but it all comes back to having a plan and having the confidence to ride at your own pace, not be intimidated by people on the road, to have the support of other people around you, and the willingness to get out there and to give it a go. So do we have just general tips for people who are at the point where they want to give it a go? They're about to walk into a bike shop and think, okay, I want a bike. What do I do? I mean,
I've got some words on
I
that
know
one.
what I would, but I mean, we've all been in this situation. I mean, we chose at the time Velo Cycles because it was right around the corner, and it had the bike that we were looking at, and one thing led to another, and here I am. But everybody else, I mean, Tina, where did you went to Kmart and got that bike? But your next bike,
next bike was an eBay bike, because after that experience I had of, you know, riding this 22 kilo bike, and my husband then saying to me, well, no wonder you have problems, your bike's so heavy. And so I looked on, I actually went to a bike shop the very next day and thought, oh wow, you know, this bike, the guy put me on this bike, and I rode it and just went, no wonder I'm having problems riding that other bike. And you know, it was so much lighter, and I could, at the time I couldn't afford a new bike, so I found the same bike on eBay, and still have that bike, which is pretty awesome. It's just a flat bar road bike, and it's
do you still have all of your bikes?
No, I don't own a factory warehouse. But what I was going to say about, you know, what you're talking about, how do we, you know, when you go into a bike shop, what are you doing? One of the things that I really see just so often, or we see it all the time as coaches at Real Women, is women rock up on their bikes and it's just so totally the wrong bike for that person. And I hear it all the time and I teach women all the time who come and say, oh, I'm just having so much trouble, you know, with this bike I've got, and I just feel like I'm really unsafe. And they've got this bike that I swear they've probably walked into the bike shop. That bike's been on the floor for 2 years and the guys just want to get rid of it. Yeah. And they sold that bike to somebody who doesn't know anything about what sort of riding they want to do, what sort of, the person doesn't know anything about bikes, and they don't really understand what's happening when they're buying that bike. And so it's a real tragedy that we see this happen. And you have to usually try and make the best of it. Sometimes we've helped people make the decision that they move that bike on and get something that is more suitable. And I think this mention of people being individual that Jimmy made, and also Gail talked about, that we all do different sorts of riding. I think this is also one of the issues where there are perceptions in bike shops that women are a certain sort of rider. And that's not all bike shops that are like that, but some bike shops definitely are. And I've had some terrible things said to me in my experiences in bike shops, with people just making this assumption as soon as I walk in, probably because I'm a woman. I think, and the same, a little bit the same with cycling clubs. There's a perception about what that club is about and what sort of riding there is, and which is one of the reasons Real Women started initially, was because I really wanted any person on any bike to feel like they were comfortable. So at this point, we take, you know, any person on a bike, be it a mountain bike, a flat bar road bike, a sit-up cruiser with a basket on the front, a Brompton bike, yeah, or e-bikes. We don't care. As long as you are riding that bike, that's a great thing. And riding any bike requires skill. And so that's what we do, is we use those skills for any kind of bike. And I think that whole individual thing really needs to be taken into account when before people even start to buy a bike. They need to really have a few ideas about, you know, what am I going to use this bike for? As Gail said, you know, do I put it on the tram and do half my commute on the tram and then ride the rest of the way, or do I do 28 Ks on an e-bike or a normal bike? So it requires some thinking about, you know, before you actually purchase the bike. And obviously the Brompton has some great advantages, particularly for people commuting, that you can have that dual purpose of getting on public transport so easily with a fold-up bike. But it may not be suitable for other types of riders who, you know, might want to do a 30K commute or 40K commute. It's certainly possible on a Brompton, but, you know, for some people it might not. Yeah, it might not be the right thing.
Brett, over in your part of the world, how many, what percentage of women, and what kind of, because I know you're an active part of a group over there, is there a lot done to promote women riding, and what kind of experiences can you share from your local group and area in that regard?
Yeah, I am grateful for the question, Dayna, because I do think finding community and bicycling is so important. I feel that cycling is very much a social activity. And so when you can find a group and feel a sense of belonging, it really does start to lift off some of the barriers that we otherwise encounter. And I would say there's a move in Calgary and other places in Canada too, where you do see some women's cycling clubs, and by that it's more leisurely oriented and fun, and to get people out on their bikes and to encourage, you know, activities alongside of cycling to just draw out greater numbers. And so we're starting to see more and more of that. The official statistics from the city here still shows that cycling, particularly as it relates to commuting, because those are the communities that the city would collect data on. So of those commuters, women still make up a minority, and a significant minority of the commuting population. It still tends to be dominated by men. We don't have a lot of cycling infrastructure in Calgary. There's a lot of boasting in Calgary about how we have 1,000 kilometers of pathways, and we do, and they're paved, and a great percentage of those is maintained in the wintertime as well, which is great, but they don't go to places that people need to go to. They don't go to schools, to places of work, they go downtown, but they don't go into like where the office towers are. So there's these gaps in the infrastructure that I think make it difficult for people to choose bicycling, because there's going to be points of their ride where they're out on the roads, busy roads, with more traffic, and that is always going to have an intimidating quality for a lot of people, and will just be a deterrent, I think, from looking at the bicycle as a pragmatic solution for travel. And the city's changing, which we're grateful to see, but like so many places in North America especially, it's incremental, the progress, and so the gaps in the network become stubborn problems and pretty significant barriers for the bicycling community. In a lot of urban planning discourse that I've been looking at, women on bicycles are often referred to as indicator species. I'm still trying to decide if I'm comfortable with that label or not. But what they're getting at is, as more and more women come out and see the bicycle as being a pragmatic and viable solution for transport, and particularly women with young children, that starts to indicate a bicycling network that has protected infrastructure that would be regarded as being accessible to all and available for people to take advantage of and to feel safe on. So I like the principle behind that indicator species, because it does clarify the point of what's truly an integrated network of protected bicycling infrastructure. But at the same time, I'm not sure I feel comfortable with the label just being applied to women, because I'm not sure that is quite the right frame.
I'm not sure that we've called it, well, the term here is indicator species, but it's the same indicator of how safe how safe the perceived area is. I think I've said that correctly, when given the ratio of male to female ridership is generally how safe an area is perceived to be.
Yeah.
So when we have Ride to Work Day or other big events, sometimes our local bike advocacy group, which is called Bicycle Network, does rider counts and things like that. Some areas definitely have higher percentages of female riders, and those areas are generally seen to be safer or have a more greater perceived safety, I think. Tina, Jimmy, someone come and chime in and correct my language on this one here. So it's not about, is it actually safer, but it's the perceived safety. We don't say indicator species here, do we? Have you seen that term? You're on mute.
I have heard it called, I haven't heard it called indicator species, but I've definitely heard women being referred to as the indicator of good infrastructure. Yep. And there's an awful lot of research into this stuff, research papers, and they're pretty interesting. And I guess I believe it's true. I think that the research is showing that women are so much more risk averse, and so therefore they prefer to have something that they perceive to be a safer place to ride, so separated bike lanes and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of that lacking in Melbourne where we are. So but the studies have shown that as soon as those separated bike lanes are installed, the increase in female participation certainly rises a huge amount. But if you are just doing painted green lines on the road, it really doesn't make an awful lot of difference as to how many women you actually get using that particular route.
Gail, do you know off the top of your head what the kind of gender difference or gender participation ratios are up in the Gold Coast? Just sorry to put you on the spot like that.
Yeah, look, I think it would probably be similar to other parts of other cities in Australia in terms of it being dominated by men. However, while you're talking about that indicator, women and family and young children being an indicator, I certainly know that in this local area where I live, which is Currumbin Palm Beach, it's sort of a vicinity of maybe a 5 kilometre strip along the coast, and you know, lots of schools. There are a lot of people young kids who ride their bikes to school, and parents encourage it, or mothers who take a little tribe of kids to school on bikes. And I have a sense that our community, this very localised area, not talking about the greater Gold Coast, but the localised area where I live is a very bike friendly and safe area, and that cars are respectful, those cars that operate, because most of them have got family who are on the streets riding. So even though we don't have, you know, separated bike lanes within this immediate area, my observation is that there are lots of mothers and young children riding, and my own experience of interactions with cars in this localised area is really positive.
I think Japan can be a really good example of this too. And, you know, there's lots of places around the world that have really great examples, but obviously my experience of riding in Japan is far greater than anywhere else in the world. But, you know, in Japan, women and children riding bikes, it's kind of like ubiquitous. It's just what they do. And they're allowed to ride on the footpaths, and there's usually a separated area on each side of the footpath where bicycles can ride. And gosh, everybody, you know, I go there and I see women of 80 plus riding around on their bikes, going everywhere, doing the shopping, and there's bicycle parking outside all of the shops. But the cyclists are not forced to be on the road with the car traffic all the time. So I think it does make a really big difference.
Having that community engagement is a key factor for a lot of families too. If there's a school that's really involved with getting families and encouraging active transport to get the kids to and from school safely, and reminding parents to slow down, to use active transport wherever possible, and just supporting the community in reminding the community to be considerate, can really influence how the neighbourhood feels to ride around and to move around. So yeah, point taken, Gail. It's something else that there are some, our local neighbourhood, some other neighbourhoods around in Melbourne have really focused on, and then you have neighbourhoods where it really hasn't been taken up so much, and there's a bit of a difference, quite a clear difference between some of them. Moving on to some of the other factors that women who have started to ride feel that it is something that may stop them riding. Something I've come across recently is everybody's favourite topic, saddles. It's something that you either get right and love or can never be happy with. And the number of times that somebody comes in and says, I need the perfect saddle, what have you got that's going to suit me? It's like, well, this is what works for me. What's everybody using? And then I'll come to Tina for her advice, because I know you've got some good advice. I love my Brooks because it's leather and it shapes to fit me, and I know everybody is different, but I'm sitting more upright, so it's a nice wide sprung saddle and it's beautiful. Gail, what are you riding on? You're just on my top left, so I'm picking you first.
Sure. Well, I've got a specialised saddle, actually. You'd be pleased to hear, Tina. And I had, I know it's one saddle that I have on all of my bikes except for the Brompton. And it just, I got a fitting, so I got measured up for the saddle to see where my sitting bones need to sit and what width saddle I need. It's got the nice cutout in the centre of the saddle, and ever since I had that fitting, it's made a difference to my bike riding, and it was really worthwhile. So that's what
What's the saddle? Do you know which one it is?
Oh, no, sorry, I can't remember. I've got the card, so I can remember it when I have to repurchase, update it. But yeah, I can't remember, Tina.
Brett?
In my case, I've been really fortunate. I haven't really had a saddle on a bicycle that I didn't find comfortable, and so usually I just stick with what came with the bicycle. And that's everything from, a saddle that you'd find on a conventional road bicycle to, a BMX when I was smaller, and a mountain bike. And with my Brompton, it's just the standard saddle that came with my M6L that I quite enjoy. And I was surprised because it has a bit more padding than I'm used to with bicycle saddles. But I've been finding as well that it's kept me comfortable over long periods of time. And so I saw no reason to change it. So I'm probably not as helpful in this regard. I seem to find saddles that break to me instead of the other way around.
That's fine. Jimmy?
So on my road bike, I also have a Brooks, but it's one of the rubber ones, which I purchased for commuting in the UK because it's a little bit wet. And there's nothing worse than getting on a bike with a wet, soggy saddle at the end of the day of work. And then on my mountain bike, I have a Charge Spoon, which is actually a men's saddle, but it just suits me perfectly. I also have a collection of probably about 10 saddles that have been very uncomfortable.
Anybody else want to chime in before I throw to Tina? No, Tina?
So this is an issue that comes up with us all the time at Wheel Women, and I am constantly asked, by women, so what's the best saddle? And I can't answer that question because I don't have your butt. So, you know, everyone's really individual, and a saddle choice is such an individual thing. And it really depends on your anatomy and how you sit on the bike and what kind of riding you do. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into it. But one of the things I tell people all the time that makes a really big difference if you're having problems with all of this is what Gail said, is a bike fit or a saddle fit can make a huge amount of difference. So if you're sitting, for example, on my 22 kilo clunker that I had, and the bike was actually probably a little bit too big for me, and because I bought it off the department store floor and had no idea about buying the right size bike, then of course I was probably never going to be very comfortable on it. So having a proper bike fit and getting a bike that's the right size will start in the right direction. But if you're having continued problems, Brett's really lucky that she can ride on, you know, the saddles that come on the bikes. And some people can definitely do that, but other women will go through 10 saddles before they find the right thing. And that can be really difficult because it often means purchasing a saddle every time and then just tossing them out, and they're expensive. So we've started a bit of a saddle library at Wheel Women so people can try different ones. And I'm always trying to grab people's old saddles so that people can try them out. But having that bike fit, is really important because it's usually not just a saddle issue. It's actually how you're sitting on the bike, whether that's, you know, you're leaning too far forward or you're sitting too upright or your saddle height might be incorrect. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into that comfort. So I recommend bike fits, and there are people out there who are specialists in doing bike fits if you're really having big issues. I think any good bike shop, and Dayna would know working at Brompton Junction, you know, one of the first things you do is you fit the bike to the person. So
unfortunately, sorry to interrupt you. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do now because of COVID.
Yeah,
there's no face-to-face at all. If someone, and it's really hard at the moment because we have to do our best guess instead of allowing people to take test rides. But yeah,
and I think that's the issue with most bike fitters now. They probably can't work because it's very close contact. So it is a really difficult thing. But a couple of things for people who are having problems. Gail said you were fitted for your saddle. There is a device that I'm sure other bike shops have them. I just happen to know the specialized system, and we call it the Asometer. And the Asometer basically measures your sit bones, the distance apart on your sit bones, and it will then, there's a gauge that we use, and it will then give you the recommendations for the correct width of saddle that you should be using. So saddles come in all different widths, and that can make a really big difference whether your sit bones are falling off the sides or whether you've got a saddle that's too wide and it's actually, you know, really giving you some soft tissue pressure in the perineal area and all of that stuff. So having a sit bone measure on the Asometer can be a really good start. We've actually got one at Wheel Women if anyone is local and needs one.
I've only ever done the thick cardboard measurement before.
Yeah, you can
more and you kind of sit down and kind of bump around.
Yeah, you can do it yourself. It's a bit tricky though. The Asometer works quite well.
Well, that's how I found that my standard Brompton saddle, and when I bought mine, there was only the one width Brompton saddle, which is 147 millimeters, which is what I predict Brett's probably got on her Brompton. There's now a slightly wider one, but my B67, which is what I've got on two of my Bromptons, is wider again. And I only realized that I could have a more comfortable saddle when I sat on a friend's B67, and it's like, oh, this is awesome. And so I thought I need one of these for myself. And then when I got my another Brompton, which has a lower handlebar, I bought a cambium, which is a vulcanized rubber saddle, and just assumes that I'd need the widest one available and I'd need it set at the same position as my B67s. And then when I went to ride it, it's like, hang on, this is completely different. I don't need it so far back. I'm sitting more forwards and it's different. The material is different. So I needed to break into it rather than it's going to break into me. But it completely different feel and riding position just by having my handlebars about that much lower. So definitely the type of bike, whether that's the brand and style of bike or the difference between a H bar and an M bar, if you're looking at a Brompton, can make a big difference as to the type of saddle, the angle, the comfort, everything makes.
So there's the 3 touch points on the bike, which are obviously the handlebars, the saddle and the pedals. And those 3 touch points all work together, and you can't, you know, it's a bit of a fallacy to say that, oh, it's my saddle issue. You've got to work all 3 together to actually, you know, make the most of your bike fit, really. So it's not a quick answer of, I'll get a new saddle and that'll fix everything. Yeah. Cool. And just before, as I just wanted to quickly touch on something else that I think is an important topic, e-bikes, just quickly before we wrap up. I'm not so sure that it's a big thing that holds women back more than perhaps men, who may be more inclined to perceive that electric assistance is cheating. I know Tina has e-bikes. Does anybody, Gail has an e-bike. Does anybody else here raise your hand, either electronically or physically, if you've ridden an e-bike?
We're in the market for one, my family.
Cool. Yep. So e-bikes are definitely not cheating. They do provide an excellent way of assisting you getting from place to place, whether that's because you don't sweat as much, you get there feeling like you can continue your day as normal with as much energy as you'd like to have, or helping you on the return trip home after a really long, stressful, tiring day, or because it's gusting, as Elsie was saying, at 59k an hour winds, that you can still arrive on time. E-bikes are getting better and better as time goes on. They're definitely a way to enable more people to ride and just to live life as they want to, without having to put in so much effort, especially if it's hilly or windy or whatever. Tina, would you like to chime in with comments?
Oh, I love talking about e-bikes, because I have been in the situation where I have had my e-bike with me and I've heard people behind me saying, yeah, but you know, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And I find it kind of interesting that I hear those comments, because it's certainly not the case at all. And I try to explain to people that the e-bike I have, it has different settings of power, and the minimum setting, which I normally ride it on, is, you know, you still get a pretty serious workout. So the power cuts out at 25 k's an hour. And I'm not generally, if I'm on the road, I'm not generally riding at 25 k's an hour. I might be doing 30 to 32, 33 k's an hour. And so pushing a bike that's, you know, 15, 16 kilos, which when you've been used to riding a bike that's 8 kilos, when you're pushing that kind of weight at that speed, it's a pretty serious workout. So I actually think I'm fitter because of that. And now I get on my 8 kilo bike and just go, oh my God, you know, what's happening? Because I'm so used to riding this much heavier bike. But the other thing is, so I don't think that they're a cheats bike by any means. I still get a really serious workout. The other thing is I ride the bike more because it's just so much damn fun. I can't get off the stupid thing. And ever since I've had it, I keep thinking, do I really need these other bikes? Because I'm just sitting on this one all the time. It is seriously great fun. The other day, yesterday, I think it was, I had to go and collect something from down the street, and I knew that those rain clouds were coming, and I had to go out and get home really quickly because I didn't really want to get wet. And so I put the bike on turbo and I just flew down the street and I flew home again because I had a hill to come back up and bike was on turbo. So it was incredibly convenient from that point of view. But I think the biggest thing for me is that, and I've talked about this quite a bit during Women's Health Week, is that I was diagnosed with a heart condition 18 months ago. And the cardiologists basically said to me that you shouldn't really be riding those really big hills anymore, and definitely no interval training. And so I have a 50% blockage in my aorta, so I have to be, you know, a little bit careful. I cope with it okay, so they're not too concerned. I'm not about to have a, you know, imminent heart attack, but I still have to be careful. So when I was told that, I felt like a window had slammed shut. And as a cyclist, that was quite devastating. So, you know, to have all these lovely bikes that were great for climbing hills and I wasn't allowed to do it, and, you know, going out with the Real Women group and they were riding up the hills and I couldn't do it, I was really feeling quite, you know, like I was missing out on all the things I really loved and had encouraged other people to do. So when the opportunity to have this e-bike came along, you know, I kind of thought, oh yeah, I don't know, is it really going to do anything? And it took me one ride before I just went, oh, that window's just opened again, because now I can actually go and do all those things that I love doing, feeling like it's risk-free. I can go up those hills and I wouldn't have it on economy power. I'd probably have it on the, you know, one of the highest settings. So I get a lot more assistance. So I keep my heart rate a little bit lower and just stay in that safety zone. So for me, it's been a fantastic thing. And I think that for other people who may have some issues from a physical health point of view, that perhaps riding sometimes is or the thought of doing hills and doing that kind of thing prevents them from riding. I think e-bikes are just a godsend because it gets people onto the bikes. And as far as I'm concerned, for any person, if it gets them on a bike, then an e-bike is a great thing. It doesn't matter what kind of bike it is. If it's an e-bike, a pedal bike, anything, as long as you're riding, I think it's fantastic. So I'm a huge advocate for e-bikes.
One of the most popular e-bikes at work, one of our sister stores, is a e-cargo bike. So many families are coming in and using this as a car alternative because their kids is getting slightly bigger to carry around, or even before they're large enough to ride, they want to have their kids on the back, but they also need to carry stuff. So it's definitely a really worthwhile car alternative, especially if, like here in the inner city, you don't have to travel from this side of town to that side of town, then back to the other side of town. Even if you did, then you've got that assist to help you get you from place to place. But if you don't have to do that regularly, you just have to go from A to B to C, like so many women do. There's homes to drop off the kids, to pick up groceries and throw work into the mix as well. There's so many different stops. And having that assist and needing to carry so much stuff, some or all of the time, it's fantastic. We will be getting a Brompton electric at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future. We don't have an exact ETA here yet, but we do have many inquiries. So as soon as we have something concrete to share with people,
I want to chime in here too a little bit about something else about these e-bikes. Is that I think one of the big limiting factors at the moment is the cost of them. And this is another thing that we've seen at Real Women, as people have come to us with, they've bought an e-bike and they've bought one at the lower end of the price range. And they might get 30 Ks out of that bike before it needs a charge. And it's kind of defeating the purpose of having the e-bike, because generally they'll take you a really long way. So I think it's one of those classic things of you get what you pay for with an e-bike. Cost is definitely a really big issue. And I think if the government can perhaps chip in and do something about lowering the tariffs on some of the e-bikes as well, and even providing the incentives like they do overseas for people to have e-bikes for commuting to work, I think would just be a wonderful, wonderful thing to happen. Because when you're talking about, you know, some of the, particularly the road e-bikes like I have, the cost is just, who buys them? You know, they're so expensive. It's the cost of a car. And so, but you know, an e-road bike is not going to do what a car does. So you're talking about carrying cargo and doing shopping and kids and everything. You simply can't do that on an e-road bike because there's no capacity to put racks on it or anything. So if you're going to spend 10, 15 grand on an e-bike that's not going to do that for you, then, you know, why are you buying it? So you've got some questions to ask yourself before you purchase, or what sort of bike you purchase in the e-bike range.
Yes, yes, some incentives.
Brompton e-bike would be awesome.
Well, it's got all the advantages of folding like a regular Brompton,
yeah,
but with that assist.
Yeah, I'm there. I want one.
I'd love to have them.
Yeah.
But yes, we're still waiting on an official date for when they will be available, pricing, etc., etc. But hopefully it's coming in the not too distant future. Brett, do you get rebates or government assistance for any kind of bikes, any work things if you buy a bike for work over there?
It's definitely something that bike advocates in a lot of places in Canada are asking for. The closest we've seen to anything yet is there's a town in the Rocky Mountains called Canmore, and maybe, I think it's just Canmore actually, that offers its residents a rebate on getting studded tires for the winter time so they can keep riding their bicycles in the winter. So that's so far the closest thing we have to a rebate for people in the bicycling community. But certainly the more organized groups in big centers, as well as national lobby groups for, like Cycle Canada as an example, are asking government to, as has been mentioned, to lower tariffs on the import of bicycles, in particular e-bikes, and also to consider creating a rebate for the purchase of an electric bicycle. We do that for cars, for electric vehicles. Why not do it for bicycles and help encourage people to that form of transportation? I just wanted to add quickly as well that I too am a big fan of e-bikes. As I mentioned, it's something that my family is looking to purchase, and we are waiting for the Brompton Electric. But that being said, one of the things that I'm really excited about is, as Tina mentioned, it is bringing more people to bicycling e-bikes, and it has a great potential to be a game changer for a lot of folks who might not have otherwise thought about, you know, biking as an adult or into their senior years. And e-bikes certainly enable all kinds of people to come to come to cycling. And in Calgary, places like Calgary or elsewhere in Canada or in Melbourne even, it's bringing more people to put greater demand on the cycling infrastructure, helping more people to see the benefit of having protected bike lanes and the shortcomings of paint infrastructure and the shortcomings of no infrastructure at all for people in active transport. And so I see an opportunity that, you know, some folks who might have otherwise have been an adversary to investments in protected active transportation infrastructure might now recognize the benefits, both for people who are using the road as a motorist and those who are using the road as an active transport individual. And so I think that's one of the reasons too I feel really encouraged and excited about the growth potential of e-bikes, is that it will bring more people to have those experiences of seeing how great it is to explore your city on a bicycle and feel safe at the same time, and how awful it is when you feel like you're the only traffic calming measure on the road is you, a person on a bicycle.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, e-bikes are going to be, well, I'd like to see them play far more of a role in our future transport methods compared to vehicles, whether they're petrol or diesel, even compared to electric cars. Although vehicles will have a place going forward because, you know, there are long distances and we don't have public transport options going everywhere. But I would definitely like to see an increased emphasis placed on active transport. I think we really do need to wrap things up. Thank you everybody so much for joining, for your input. It's been lovely talking with you all. Special thanks to Tina and Brett both for the short notice and for making time to join us today. I'll try and get this this webinar meeting online for everybody to see who wasn't able to join us today, probably on YouTube if I can, ASAP. But thank you everyone, and
Thank you.
We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Dayna. Nice to meet you, Brett, and thanks everyone for joining in.
Nice to meet you, everyone. Thank you so much, Dayna.
Thank you.